guys, I'm Nathan Masters. Welcome to our LEGO channel, Brick System Brothers. Today is a video about gaps in the LEGO system. So once you start building with LEGO pieces, you realize there's a lot you can do, but there's also a few things you can't do, and it seems like there's maybe some parts of the system that aren't like fully developed. Like we seem to be missing a certain size of curve here, certain size of this buildable thing. There's not really a good way to build a corner out of these rails. So yeah, let's just take a look at some elements that appear to be missing in the system, what can be done to kind of work around it, and then finally I also have found a Flickr page that has a whole bunch of proposals for new elements. So yeah, let's look at those. So first thing here is going to be a little inspection of a few common problems you might run into when you're building with these specific types of pieces. And this curve family here is pretty good at allowing us to build exteriors with curvature. We have this large arch, which is a 4x4 quarter circle, a small one which gives us a 2x2 quarter circle. This inner one, grab the piece I need here. This curvature does exist, but we only have it right now in our 2x2 full circle. There's actually a brand new element that's a half circle, but the biggest gap that's really obvious here is this middle piece, which is our 3x3. Now recently we have received a 3x3 curvature piece, but it is kind of rounded on one end, so it isn't quite all the way in this part family, and it seems like, you know, these are both pretty established pieces. It seems like this should definitely be included in the LEGO system, and it's been missing. So kind of an unsolved mystery of why we don't have it, but I guess what I would say it boils down to is there hasn't been a need in LEGO development for the designers to design and use this piece. So that one is definitely a gap that a lot of people notice early on building with LEGO. The other one that might take a little longer to notice is these upright curves when you start building vertical, and we have the smallest one, just a 1-to-1 in terms of, you know, our brick height. So if you want to go up one brick and a plate, we have the small one. You want to go up 2 bricks or so is the next size up, and then you start building up even higher, 3 or 4 bricks. We have one for that, but again, this 3, or this kind of middle one, we are missing. Now this inner curve does fit to a few other pieces. There's a 1x4 or a 1x3 kind of arched window piece in the night bus. I think that fits inside this curve here. But in terms of having a dedicated piece that actually fits into this gap in the system, I don't think we have one. And again, these are somewhat older pieces. They've been around for a little while. We would kind of expect to have a complete family here, and it's just kind of missing. So there's another one to kind of think about. The fences are on here because oftentimes it would have been handy for me to have a single bar to use when completing a fence row. And a lot of people tend to think in terms of corners. We would need a single for a corner. With some types of fences that is the case. We do need kind of a dedicated element to fill in our corner. With these specific bar fences, you can actually obtain a really good looking corner by just using one of the ends of this and moving it in a stud. What this introduces, however, is a 1 stud offset on whichever side that you use this method, and so by the time you get to the other end of the build, you know, if you want to get to the end of this with fences, we've got one here. Alright, so here's the next one needs to start here, and now we have this gap of 1 stud that we need another fence piece for. And we don't have it. Well, all we have is a 1x4, so we can only work in increments of 4. It'd be really nice to have a 1x1 of this fence to fill in those gaps that do arise. And once we have a 1x1 and we need to fill a gap of 3 or 2, we can just start stacking. You know, we could put 2 over here. If we have a gap of 3, we could just line 3 of them up over here, and that would work fine. So all we need to complete the family of the bar fence pieces is a 1x1 with this kind of profile on here. So just think the fence that we have, but cut off 3 of them, and you're left with a 1x1. So that would be handy to have, but we don't. We have to make do. the last, well, not the last one, but another one to look at before I look at the Flickr album is these rails. These rails are really nice for adding texture. I used these in my Patriot Hill MOC to add kind of a separator between the basement, which was done in red, and the upstairs, which was done in white. And so I used these rails as just kind of a transition, and that worked really well. One thing I ran into was an issue when I was rounding corners. It would have been really nice to have something that could round this corner all the way around and continue this groove. And so what I ended up having to do was just hold each of these back and then build out the corner of my house, so that now these rails can run in to the inner side of this corner, and you know the walls will build up on either side here. And so you can make it look like the transition continues through this built up corner of the house. Another thing that you would run into, similar problem, different texture, is on textured bricks. And if we want a textured brick to run around the corner of a house, we see again where once you get out to the end here, in order for this to work, you would need to get the texture on both sides of the brick. Now, our masonry brick here, our 1x2s, are somewhat excusable because they have this, it's just a one stud exposed edge. So even if it is going to show up in a model, I think this is shown up in a few official LEGO models as well, it starts to become less noticeable than issues that we do have with our rail plates. Another way to look at this would be if you want to start making an inside corner. If you want to build like this and you want to run something to the inside, again, kind of our only solution right now is to use a built-out corner so that our pattern can just run in from each side and then appear to continue through this corner here. There's not a lot we can do to kind of make this line up and continue that pattern on our inner corner. So let's jump onto Flickr and see what we can find. Alright, so I've jumped straight onto our Flickr wishlist here. I'm not going to go into the details of how I got here. I know if you start looking, asking questions around, it's not too hard to find people that have these compiled wish lists, these ideas for new LEGO pieces. So this particular list, this album actually, is over 1,500 part ideas compiled by, I think they're all created by this user named Zulbrick. So I'll link to this album directly, but there's just a large accumulation of new piece ideas for basically filling the gaps in the system based on the pieces we already have. So here's 3 new pieces that are all based on our 1x4 brick with this slot. And you start thinking about, like, well, what are those actually good for? Is this guy just designing these to exist so that they can become part of a larger part family, or would these actually be useful? And I think I've looked through all of these. I think for the most part, this guy just likes to complete the part families that are missing in the LEGO system and not necessarily think about pieces that are useful for allowing new techniques. A lot of these pieces are also really similar to things that the LEGO group already produces. And so it's my opinion that a lot of these I don't actually think LEGO should try to produce in the future, because what they have made is enough, and as a builder, part of getting good at designing and building MOCs and projects is working with the system that we already have. So keep that in mind as I go through here, but there's some really interesting ideas on here, and I would encourage you guys to look through them. These have also been compiled by other people and websites. So this website, Tips and Bricks, has done a little vignette here. And actually, here's one of the pieces I was talking about, this 2x2 outside corner for this door rail. It seems like that's somewhat wanted among the community. A double headlight brick, I'm not sure how that would be beneficial or useful right off the bat, but it seems like some people would want to have this. Now, the inverted 1x1 inverted slope would allow for some really interesting detail work to be done, because our 1x1 cheese slope is a really fantastic piece. You can add slopes and details to really small areas of projects, and it really rounds out models when you're looking at it from farther away. So the inverted edition of this would be a nice piece to have. Double studded plate, some other clips. So multiple ideas are floating around out here, and they're not too hard to find. They're out on the internet. So my personal Flickr favorites, I have added a few of these to my list, and I'll look at these because some of them are the ones that I specifically mentioned in the first segment when we're looking at our system and what's filling the gaps here. And then there's a few, these are all from the other wish list here, Lego Piece Idea by Zulbrick. And there's a few that he's made that I really appreciate, but I don't necessarily think would be a necessary addition to the Lego family. So let's start with this one. Number 1471 is a prototype idea for our missing 3x3 corner. It's pretty intuitive, and all you really would need to do is figure out where it intersects with studs on the plate and add those gaps into the wall, and that's been done here. It looks like it would fit pretty well into the system. It has studs on each end. So the only other thing you would want to ask is, does there need to be an additional stud up on the top here? I don't think so. I think this would be a good piece to produce for Lego. The other one that I talked about is also on Zulbrick Wishlist, Brickwish, and it does fill that gap in between our vertical curves. So it just seems like kind of extrapolating from our current piece design, where the top of this curve does allow for a tile to be placed, and that would give you this smooth transition. Now, the one thing that the Lego group would have to decide if they produce this piece is, our largest one does extend to 2 studs, everything else just extends to 1. So is this filler piece going to have the 2 stud extension, or is it going to have 1? Number 675 here looks like could be produced with just 1 stud. So an interesting idea here for that piece as well. Alright, so let's go a little further and look at some other ones. Here's the 1x1 bar fence idea, 1405, and I guess all this is, it's really simple. Just imagine our bar fence that we had and chop off through the bars, and what are you left with? This piece right here, 1405. One piece that I didn't talk about on my little display, well, here's this one again. This is number 124 in the Zulbrick wishlist. The piece I didn't talk about would be a new piece for our tall slope family. And when you start wanting to build more complex roof shapes with our tall slopes, this would be one of the first ones I would want to have, is this concave inner valley piece. So we have this for our regular 45 degree 2x2. We don't have it for really anything else, so this would be a cool piece to have. This is number 320 on the Brickwish list. And yeah, what else do we have? Here's an interesting one. The inner corner for a door rail piece it looks like it's just a 2x2 corner plate with that rail on there, and it pretty much looks exactly like you would expect it to, so that would be a good one to have. Here's one that is not necessarily impossible to get this effect, because we could use one of these, and the pieces in gray here just mean we already have this piece. So a 2x2 ridge cap for a 45 degree slope. We could use that for the center row, and then we do have a peak that has this cut on here. I'll build this up real quick, and let's take a look at that. So the goal here was to make a ridge for a roof that intersects at the peak. And at first look, it might seem like this isn't going to really work, and that 2x2 cross ridge is starting to look pretty enticing, but you can't forget that we have this piece right here with this kind of extended peak. And what this allows us to do is build onto this ridge from pretty much any point. And now you start to see that we do have a way to accomplish this. The downside here is that it's not strictly on a 2x2 footprint. You do have to extend it a little bit. The smallest we could get would be a 2x4 footprint. So we do have this ridge piece right here. We do have that in the 2x2 form. So if that was in the center and we were looking at just that 2x4 area, this is basically what we want to be accomplished in our wish list. But this is currently a solution that does exist. You just need to use these kind of ridge extensions. And these are really useful for making gable ends and tying different slopes back into a main roof. But up at the peak, that is a solution that could be done. So yeah, as you can see, this is totally achievable. All we need is another extra stud here and here. So I think while this is an interesting piece, it isn't necessarily something we need in the Lego system. Okay, let's look at a few of the ones that are just for fun. This is a 2x3 slope with a turntable, like this recession for a turntable piece to be inserted. It's not necessarily something that would lend a lot of new opportunities, because you can put a turntable piece on a slope with some of the pieces we already have, but this number 1193 on the Brick Wish would be an interesting one. I think it's something that I would just try to collect just because it would exist, but it doesn't, so I'm not really disappointed we don't have this. Here's an idea for a railroad part that would allow us to switch between our clip tracks. So that's this end over here with kind of this locking mechanism, and then there's kind of a transition point where you could put on these 1x16 rail pieces. So I would use this piece if we had it to go from kind of a rail yard on this side, and then that would just extend outside somewhere. And then over here, this would be in the doorway of an engine shed, and this inside would be a maintenance pit. And so this would allow this to be all open underneath, and you could continue this rail surface really easily with this piece. Last one for this video is a switcher for some train tracks, and the only switcher we have currently in production for our Lego trains is this kind of it's got a straight side, and then it jumps off and it kind of curves back towards a parallel track. And what's unfortunate about that is you can't get a lot of realism with the switcher piece, because if you do want to branch off on a gentle curve, it's all built into the switcher where it starts trying to curve back towards a parallel track. So it gets a little bit jumpy. I don't know if you saw in our running the trains video, but this was something I had to deal with when I was working on the side of the tracks that go over to Josh's city. There's kind of a whole mess of really back and forth track over there because of our current switcher situation, and that can cause some problems when you're running trains. I think it'd be really cool to have a switcher like this, because it's kind of an interesting angle of intersection. There's a little bit of curvature here, and it would allow for some more complex switching capabilities. I think it could bring some more realism to train layouts if we had something like this. And once you start down this path, there's just a whole bunch of different switchers you have to look at. Would you rather have this kind or this kind if we had to choose one? Personally, this one is my favorite because it isn't really similar to anything else that we have currently offered. So 1138 here. So yeah, that's it for looking at some gaps in the Lego system. I can't really address like filling these gaps because that's only something the Lego company can do as they produce new parts and ideas. And new parts are being produced every year. That's something we're keeping an eye on with our new elementary website, and something I did touch on briefly in our rare Lego episode. But these particular gaps with our curve family seem like they should have been addressed a while ago, and they haven't. So that's interesting to talk about and think about, like why don't we have these pieces? And what we end up having to do is decide, are we gonna work our way around as builders? Are we gonna figure out solutions to this that work, or are we just gonna kind of be wishy-washy and wait around for these pieces to happen? I think as builders we should figure out our own solutions and just keep practicing. It doesn't necessarily have to look pretty the first time around. It's what's important is that you find something that works and you get to know the system, and at the same time you run into these limits of the system. I think that's when you can start to experiment and break through and find those other solutions that are out there. And that's the beauty of Lego, is being able to accomplish something that doesn't seem like we have the right tools for the job, but there's such a wealth of pieces that are already out and available that, you know, the more you practice and build with these, the better you're going to get. So keep that in mind as you work on your projects. And it's good to have ideas for new pieces, but you shouldn't spend all your time wishing that they existed, because we might get them and we might not. And at the end of the day, the pieces that we have are the ones that we have to work with. Especially if you're a Lego purist and you want to only build with Lego pieces, and this is where this becomes really important. If you don't mind mixing in a few off-brands, then it's not as big of a deal. You can even start 3D printing your own. But for me personally, I am a Lego purist. I really like everything to be within the structured system that we have, that is well defined, and that's kind of the beauty of it for me, is that we have enough. The way that it is, we have enough to make amazing things. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you in the next video. Brick System Brothers.